In the quiet streets of Kyoto, long after the crowds have gone, there is a soft glow behind a paper screen. Inside, a woman moves with unhurried grace, her steps measured, her gestures deliberate. Every motion seems to speak, though she says almost nothing. Her laughter is low, her smile fleeting, her presence magnetic. To the world, she is a mystery, a symbol of beauty, of elegance, and often of misunderstanding. But who is she, truly? A performer? A companion? A relic of a vanished Japan? Or a living link to its soul? This is the story of the geisha, not the myth born from novels and films, but the real tradition. Centuries in the making, a story of art, of discipline, and of quiet power. A world built on music, on poetry, on the subtle dialogue between appearance and emotion. Tonight, we'll step into that world softly, respectfully, to understand how the geisha came to be, how she lived, how she endured, and why her presence still echoes in Japan's heart today. The word geisha means quite literally a person of the arts. It is a simple definition, but behind it lies a world of quiet complexity, a world shaped by discipline, tradition, and an endless pursuit of grace. To most outsiders, the image of a geisha is immediately recognizable. A woman in a silk kimono, her face painted white, her hair arranged like a sculpture, her steps small, her eyes calm. Yet for all its familiarity, few truly understand what this image represents. A geisha is not a courtesan. She is not a figure of seduction, but of refinement. Her craft is the mastery of conversation, music, dance, and presence, the subtle art of making an evening feel timeless. The confusion between the geisha and the courtesan has lingered for centuries, especially outside Japan. It began when travelers and soldiers glimpsed fragments of a culture they did not fully comprehend, a world of lanterns and laughter where women entertained powerful men. To Western eyes, it seemed to belong to the realm of desire, but in truth, it was a world built on performance, not on intimacy. The geisha's task was never to seduce, but to enchant. Her art was to make the ordinary seem extraordinary, to turn a cup of tea into a ritual, a few words into a melody, an evening into a moment outside of time. In her presence, everything slowed down. The clatter of the city faded. A conversation became an art form, a delicate exchange where every gesture carried meaning. To understand what a geisha is, we must look beyond the surface of her appearance, beyond the painted face and the silk kimono, and see the centuries of culture that shaped her. For in Japan, beauty has never been about perfection. It has always been about balance, about restraint, about finding harmony in small things. The geisha embodies that philosophy. She is the living reflection of Ikki, a uniquely Japanese idea of refined simplicity, a beauty that whispers rather than shouts. It is a kind of elegance that cannot be bought or faked. It is learned, practiced, and lived. Through her art, the geisha preserves traditions that might otherwise have vanished. Old songs, classical dances, gestures of respect and subtle emotion. She carries with her the spirit of the Edo period, when culture flourished behind the paper doors of tea houses. Even today, when modern Japan moves at a dizzying pace, the world of the geisha remains a quiet sanctuary of grace, a place where time feels slower, where the old ways are not forgotten, and where beauty still exists in the gentle rhythm of a fan opening, the sound of a shamisen string, and the faint rustle of silk as a woman bows. The story of the geisha is the story of Japan itself, its art, its discipline, its delicate balance between change and tradition. And to understand her, we must travel back to where it all began, to the early days of Edo, when this art form first took shape in the heart of a rapidly changing world. The world in which the geisha was born was known as ukiyo, literally the floating world. It was a world that existed alongside the rigid order of the Tokugawa shogunate, a world where people sought beauty to escape the weight of everyday life. In the cities of Edo, Kyoto, and Osaka, the streets outside the castle walls were alive with color and sound. Merchants called out their goods, kabuki actors drew crowds to the theaters, and tea houses filled with laughter and the clink of porcelain cups. The air smelled of incense and grilled fish, and lanterns reflected softly on canals that wound through the city like veins of light. Life in the floating world was fleeting by design. It was about moments a poem shared over sake, a melody played on the shamisen, a glance across a dimly lit room. People came to the Hanamachi, the flower towns, not to forget reality, but to feel it more vividly for a brief time. The samurai, bound by duty and silence, found here a rare place of freedom. Merchants, forbidden to display their wealth openly, expressed it through art, fashion, and patronage. And for the artists, dancers, and musicians who lived among them, this world was both refuge and stage. The floating world did not deny impermanence, it celebrated it. Cherry blossoms that bloomed for only a few days, snow melting on rooftops, the last light of a candle at the end of the night. These were not symbols of loss, but reminders of beauty's fragile truth. It was in this space suspended between duty and desire, between silence and celebration, that the geisha's art took root. Her role was to give shape to the fleeting, to make transience beautiful through discipline and grace. When she danced, it was for the moment. When she played music, it was for the air that carried it. Nothing was permanent, and that was the point. The ukiyo was not just a place, but a way of seeing the world. It taught that life itself is a performance, that art is found in the act of living, and that even the briefest encounter can leave a lasting trace. From this world of floating moments, the geisha emerged, not as a figure of indulgence, but as a guardian of the ephemeral, a woman who turned impermanence into art. To understand the world of the geisha, we must first travel back to the Japan of the 17th century, to the Edo period, a time of peace, isolation, and remarkable cultural growth. For over 200 years, Japan lived under the Tokugawa shogunate. The country was closed to the outside world, its people bound by a strict social order. Samurai, farmers, artisans, merchants each had their place. But while the government ruled with discipline and control, another world quietly flourished in the shadows of the cities, a world of pleasure, of beauty, and of art. This was the world of the ukiyo, the floating world. It was a realm of fleeting delights, where the rigid structure of society loosened, and where one could briefly escape the burdens of duty and rank. In the floating world, people gathered in Hanamachi, literally flower towns. These were entertainment districts filled with tea houses, theaters, restaurants, and the homes of musicians, dancers, and courtesans. The most famous of them all was Yoshiwara, in the city of Edo, a district walled off, illuminated at night by hundreds of paper lanterns, a place where art and indulgence intertwined. Here, the early seeds of the geisha tradition were planted, but at first, the entertainers were not women at all. The earliest geishas were men known as taikomochi or hokan. They were jesters, storytellers, and conversationalists, serving wealthy patrons, much like European court fools. They entertained with wit and charm, played the drum, recited poetry, and eased the heavy atmosphere of political meetings or banquets. As time passed, however, women began to take their place. Female performers, inspired by earlier traditions like the shirabyoshi, female dancers from the Heian and Kamakura eras, brought new elegance and grace to the art. Unlike the courtesans, whose beauty was offered for pleasure, these women offered art, conversation, and music. They brought balance to the raucous, male dominated spaces of the tea houses. By the mid 18th century, female entertainers had become so skilled and admired that they began to outshine their male counterparts. The term geisha, once used for men, slowly came to refer almost exclusively to women. In these early decades, the distinction between oiran high-ranking courtesans and geisha was still delicate. Both existed within the same districts. Both wore elaborate kimonos and intricate hairstyles. But the difference lay in purpose. The courtesan was a figure of desire, trained in the arts of allure and romance. The geisha, meanwhile, was a figure of art and culture, trained in music, poetry, and conversation. Her goal was not to captivate the body, but the mind. To protect this distinction, laws were created. By the 1772, the authorities of Yoshiwara and Kyoto's Shimabara district issued decrees forbidding geishas from engaging in sexual relationships with clients. They were to remain purely entertainers, guardians of refinement and artistic grace. These laws helped to define the identity of the geisha. They placed her within a new social space, neither servant nor lover, but something rarer, a woman whose value came from talent, discipline, and composure. As the decades passed, the presence of geishas spread beyond Edo and Kyoto. Tea houses opened in Osaka, Kanazawa, and Nagoya, each cultivating its own style, dialect, and traditions. Entire neighborhoods became dedicated to their craft, each one known as a hanamachi. Within those small, lantern-lit streets, young girls trained for years to master the arts that defined their world. The rise of the geisha coincided with a flourishing of urban culture. The Edo period saw the birth of kabuki theater, woodblock printing, and haiku poetry. Merchants, newly wealthy but socially restrained, found in the floating world a place where they could express their tastes and ambitions. They commissioned paintings, hosted banquets, and surrounded themselves with art. And at the heart of this culture stood the geisha, graceful, witty, and endlessly composed. By the late 18th century, the geisha had become an indispensable part of Japan's social life. She was no longer a novelty, but an institution, an artist whose presence could elevate any gathering. Her kimono and hair ornaments became symbols of refinement, her movements a silent language of elegance. Yet even then, the world she inhabited was fragile. It depended on rules, secrecy, and balance, a dance between freedom and restraint, between beauty and impermanence. And it was within that fragile world, behind the paper screens of the ochaya, the tea houses, that the geisha began to perfect her art. By the turn of the 18th century, the figure of the geisha had fully taken shape, her identity distinct from the courtesan, the actress, or the dancer, was now woven into the cultural fabric of Japan's great cities. Nowhere was this more visible than in the Edo period's flourishing entertainment quarters. Each major city had its own hanamachi, the flower towns. Kyoto had Gion, its oldest and most prestigious district. Edo had Yoshiwara, bright and bustling, filled with the noise of merchants and samurai. Osaka had Shinmachi, known for its lively theaters and music halls. In these places, art and pleasure intertwined in ways that reflected the entire society around them. Within the Hanamachi, life followed a rhythm unlike the rest of Japan. Here, daylight was quiet, but the nights were alive, filled with the scent of incense, the sound of laughter, and the distant pluck of the shamisen, a three-stringed instrument that became the heartbeat of the geisha's art. The tea houses known as ochaya were the stage for this life. They were not the casual cafes their name might suggest, but elegant, private spaces where refined guests were entertained. Inside, light filtered softly through paper screens. Tatami mats absorbed each footstep, and every movement was deliberate, even the way a guest lifted his cup of tea. In such a space, the geisha reigned as both hostess and artist. Her duty was not to serve, but to elevate. She managed the rhythm of conversation, guided the flow of an evening, and used her training to make her guests feel that the outside world had momentarily vanished. She would play the shamisen, sing an old song, recite a poem, or engage in playful conversation. But more than her skill, it was her presence, composed, intelligent, light-hearted, that made her essential. In the rigid world of Tokugawa Japan, where class and etiquette ruled every aspect of life, the geisha offered something rare, freedom within form. Here, a samurai might sit beside a merchant, a poet beside a politician, and for a few hours, the boundaries of rank would blur. The conversation became a kind of dance, and the geisha, its invisible choreographer. Yet this freedom was carefully contained. The Hanamachi existed under strict regulation. Every entertainer had to be registered, and each tea house operated under watchful control. The government understood the value of pleasure, but feared its chaos. Thus, the life of the geisha was shaped as much by rules as by art. By the late 1700s, geishas were required to wear simpler hairstyles than courtesans, and their kimonos were tied in the back, a symbolic distinction from those of the oiran. They were forbidden to display wealth or overt sensuality. Theirs was a beauty of restraint, an elegance that spoke through discipline. Training became increasingly formalized. Young girls, often from poor families, were brought to okiya, the geisha houses, where they lived, trained, and worked under the care of an older okasan, or mother. Their early years were spent observing and imitating. They learned posture, speech, dance, and etiquette, how to bow, how to forsake, how to smile without speaking too soon. When a girl was ready, she became a maiko, an apprentice geisha. As a maiko, she learned the true heart of the craft, the dances, the music, the social grace that defined her status. Her appearance was more colorful than that of a full geisha. Bright kimono, elaborate hair ornaments, a white painted face symbolizing purity and youth. She followed her mentor, her one-san, to gatherings, watched, listened, and absorbed every subtle detail of behavior. In time, after years of training and countless lessons, the maiko would make her arake, the turning of the collar. This ceremony marked her transformation into a geiko, a fully fledged geisha. Her style became more refined, her demeanor quieter, and her role in the community deepened. Each hanamachi developed its own customs, dialects, and artistic traditions. In Kyoto, the geisha's movements were slow and deliberate, their dances inspired by the elegance of classical court life. In Edo, they were more lively and playful, reflecting the energy of the city's merchant class. Despite these regional differences, all geishas shared the same foundation, artistry rooted in discipline and subtlety. For many guests, attending an evening with geishas was not merely entertainment, It was a ritual of culture. A successful man's status was measured not only by his wealth, but by his ability to appreciate beauty, art, and conversation. And it was the geisha who revealed that world to him, teaching, in her quiet way, how to see elegance in simplicity. The life of a geisha was demanding. Behind the soft laughter and graceful gestures lay years of effort, sleepless nights of practice, and a constant awareness of decorum. To be a geisha was to live in service of perfection, not in what one possessed, but in how one moved, spoke, and existed. Even her appearance carried meaning. The white face symbolized clarity and emotional control. The red and black details around the eyes and lips evoked both strength and mystery. The kimono's folds and colors followed the seasons, its patterns reflecting age, occasion, and social rank. Every element was deliberate, a language of refinement understood only by those who listened closely. By the early 19th century, the geisha had reached her golden age. Her art was celebrated across Japan, her image immortalized in ukiyo, a woodblock prints and poetry. Artists like Kitagawa Udamaro captured her subtle beauty, the tilt of her head, the shadow behind her eyes, the quiet power of her composure. To the people of Edo, she was more than an entertainer. She was the living symbol of Iki, that rare blend of sophistication, modesty, and inner confidence. She embodied the aesthetic of a culture that prized understatement over extravagance and discipline over indulgence. But the world around her was already changing. As Japan's cities grew wealthier and more connected, the line between tradition and commerce began to blur. Tea houses became more luxurious, performances more elaborate, and soon the quiet art of the geisha would face new challenges. As modernity began to knock on Japan's paper doors, in Japan, silence has always been more than the absence of sound. It is a language of its own, a way of speaking through stillness, of saying what cannot be said aloud. For centuries, the Japanese way of communication has relied not on direct expression, but on suggestion, nuance, and rhythm. A glance, a pause, the angle of a bow. Each carries meaning that words would only dull. This quiet precision became the foundation of the geisha's art. She learned to express emotion not through speech, but through presence. A tilt of the head might signal amusement. A slow blink might mean approval. A faint smile, half hidden behind a fan, could soften a tense room more effectively than any sentence. Guests came to the tea house not only to drink or listen, but to experience this unspoken language. To them, the geisha's silence was not emptiness, it was intention. Every gesture was a brushstroke in an invisible painting. In the West, conversation often seeks clarity. In Japan, it seeks harmony. A geisha's skill lies not in speaking well, but in knowing when not to speak at all. Her role is to read the air kuuki oyomu, to sense the mood of a room without needing words. When she pours tea, she does not rush. Her hands move as though guided by music. Even the act of turning a cup is deliberate, a subtle choreography that transforms service into ceremony. This devotion to movement, to poise, to the smallest gesture is what separates art from imitation. Through repetition and patience, she learns to make her gestures effortless, as though her body itself understands beauty better than her mind. To watch a geisha is to see a conversation without sound. It is to witness centuries of etiquette distilled into motion, each gesture connecting her to those who came before. And in this quiet exchange between host and guest, between movement and stillness, the geisha reveals a truth that reaches far beyond her world, that the most profound communication often happens in silence. Behind the graceful image of the geisha lies a world of discipline. Every step, every glance, every sound she creates is the product of years of repetition, years lived within strict walls of tradition. A geisha's home is called an okiya, a house managed by a woman known as the okasan, the mother. She is not the geisha's parent by blood, but by responsibility, authority, and sometimes affection. The okasan runs the household, manages its finances, and oversees the training of all who live under her roof. Within her walls, young girls grow from apprentices into artists. Most begin their journey as children. They might arrive at the okiya at the age of 10 or 11, often from families unable to support them. Their parents sign contracts that bind them to the house, agreements that cover food, clothing, lessons, and debt. From that moment on, their life belongs to the okiya until the debt is repaid through years of performance and work. In the early mornings, the house is quiet. The smell of rice and green tea fills the air. Apprentices rise before dawn to clean the floors, polish the wooden corridors, and prepare for the day's lessons. Their days are long, but full of purpose. Training is intense and precise. They study Nihon Buyo, traditional Japanese dance, with slow, controlled movements that demand perfect posture and balance. They practice shamisen, the three-stringed instrument that accompanies their songs. They memorize lyrics written centuries ago and learn to move their hands and bodies as though time itself were slowing down. Beyond music and dance, they are taught the art of conversation, how to listen, how to speak, how to respond with poise and subtlety. In the geisha's world, words are instruments as delicate as the shamisen. They can charm, flatter, deflect, or comfort, and every phrase must flow as gracefully as the movements of a fan. A young apprentice learns to walk with short, deliberate steps, never letting her feet fully leave the floor. She learns how to bow with the right degree of humility, how to pour sake without turning her back, how to smile even when tired, and how to show interest without intrusion. Mistakes are corrected quietly but firmly. There is no shouting in the okiya, only repetition, again and again, until perfection becomes habit and habit becomes nature. When a girl becomes a maiko, her world expands. She begins to appear at evening gatherings, dressed in vivid kimonos that speak of youth and promise. Her hair is styled in elaborate shapes, decorated with ornaments that glitter in candlelight. Each ornament tells a story: cherry blossoms for spring, maple leaves for autumn, tiny bells for festivals and celebrations. The maiko is always accompanied by her wani-san, her older sister. This relationship is one of mentorship and devotion. The wani-san guides her in etiquette, in art, and in life itself. She teaches her how to manage guests, how to remain calm in difficult company, how to laugh at the right moment, and how to leave an impression without saying much at all. Evenings are the most important time in the geisha's day. As dusk falls, lanterns begin to glow across the hanamachi. Tea houses open their sliding doors, and the sound of laughter drifts through narrow streets. The geisha prepares for the night, her kimono tied, her makeup carefully applied, her mind focused. The process of dressing is almost sacred. The white base on her face is applied with precision, leaving a small, unpainted space at the nape of the neck, a subtle suggestion of beauty in what is hidden. Red and black accents frame her eyes and lips, their balance designed to convey both strength and mystery. Her kimono, heavy with silk, is chosen according to season, its colors and patterns revealing her age, status, and occasion. When she enters the Okaya, she steps into another world. The air is thick with incense and the faint scent of sake. Guests sit on tatami mats, their conversation soft. The geisha bows, smiles, and takes her place. In a single evening, she might sing, play music, pour drinks, or simply converse, whatever the atmosphere requires. Her goal is not to entertain in a loud or showy way. It is to create harmony, to make every guest feel seen, to shape the evening's rhythm until it flows effortlessly. When she laughs, the others laugh. When she listens, they feel understood. It is an art of presence, of knowing when to speak and when silence is more eloquent. When the evening ends, she returns to her okiya in the quiet hours of the night. The streets of Gion or Yoshiwara are empty, the lanterns still glowing faintly in the darkness. She removes her hair ornaments, unpaints her face, and sits for a moment in stillness. The sound of the shamisen lingers in her mind like a heartbeat fading into silence. Tomorrow, it will all begin again, the lessons, the practice, the poise, but in that small, fleeting pause before sleep, she carries the quiet satisfaction of a life devoted to art. To live as a geisha is to surrender comfort for discipline and to trade freedom for mastery. Yet for those who endure, there is beauty in that devotion. A life defined not by wealth or fame, but by grace, earned moment by moment, gesture by gesture. Through this quiet discipline, the geisha becomes not only an entertainer, but a keeper of memory, a bridge between the Japan of centuries past and the one that still awakens beneath the soft light of paper lanterns. To understand the art of the geisha, one must first understand the beauty of restraint. In Japanese culture, beauty is rarely loud. It does not demand attention, it invites it. It lives in the quiet spaces between things, in balance rather than excess, in suggestion rather than display. This idea has many names. One is Ikki, an elegance that is subtle, spontaneous, and confident. Another is wabi-sabi, the appreciation of imperfection and impermanence. Together, they form the invisible framework of the geisha's world. Every detail of her appearance is guided by these principles. Her kimono does not shout with color, but speaks in harmony, layers of muted tones that reveal their richness only upon closer look. Her movements are never rushed, for haste would break the illusion of timelessness. Even her laughter carries restraint, light, measured, fleeting. To those who watch from outside, it may seem effortless, but within that calm surface lies immense discipline. It takes years to learn how to be simple. It takes even longer to understand that simplicity is not the absence of effort, but its perfection. Restraint is not denial, it is control. It allows emotion to exist without chaos, expression to flourish without arrogance. In a culture that prizes harmony, restraint becomes a moral and artistic ideal. The geisha embodies this ideal completely. She knows that what is left unsaid can be more powerful than what is spoken, that what remains hidden can be more beautiful than what is revealed. Her world is not about abundance, but about awareness. The awareness of form, of timing, of presence. A single movement of her hand may carry the weight of centuries. A pause before she speaks may hold more meaning than the words that follow. Through restraint, she achieves clarity. Through discipline, she achieves freedom. This quiet balance is what makes her art timeless. It is why a dance performed 300 years ago can still feel alive today. The art of restraint is not just an aesthetic principle, it is a way of living. It teaches patience in a restless world and humility in the face of beauty. It reminds us that not everything precious needs to be possessed, and that the truest form of mastery is knowing when to stop. In this, the geisha's world becomes more than performance. It becomes philosophy, a meditation on the space between action and stillness, sound and silence, presence and absence. And from that space, art emerges, pure, balanced, and endlessly alive. The world of the geisha is, above all else, a world of art. It is an art not confined to a single form or performance, but one that weaves together music, dance, poetry, and silence. The quiet expression of beauty through restraint. Every aspect of a geisha's life is an act of artistry. The way she walks, the way she pours tea, the way she greets a guest, all of it becomes performance. And through this discipline, she transforms the ordinary into something sacred. The geisha's training in music is central to her craft. The shamisen, her primary instrument, has only 3 strings, yet in her hands it can speak with the depth of a human voice. Its sound is both sharp and soft, echoing through the wooden rooms of tea houses like a distant memory. She learns ancient songs, some hundreds of years old, their melodies carrying the language of forgotten poets. Through music, she tells stories that are not written, but felt. Tales of love, of loss, of fleeting seasons, all captured in the delicate rise and fall of her voice. A single note, perfectly placed, can express more emotion than any word ever could. Her dances, too, are more than movement. They are poetry in motion, each gesture carefully shaped by centuries of tradition. In Nihon Bayo, every turn of the wrist, every tilt of the head has meaning symbolic, emotional, spiritual. A slow turn might represent the passage of time, a lifted sleeve, the whisper of wind through autumn leaves. Even the stillness between motions carries weight. When a geisha dances, she becomes the poem itself. Her body is the brush, the space around her, the paper. The dance is not meant to impress, but to evoke, to stir something quiet and timeless in those who watch. Beyond performance, the geisha embodies iki, a uniquely Japanese ideal of beauty. Iki cannot be translated easily. It means elegance without pretension, refinement without effort. It is the beauty of simplicity, the confidence that comes from knowing exactly how much to reveal and how much to hold back. In the art of the geisha, iki is everywhere. It is in the pattern of her kimono, the way she lowers her eyes when she smiles, the soft laughter that hides as much as it reveals. It is not perfection she seeks, but the balance between grace and authenticity. Through the Edo period and beyond, the geisha became muse and subject for many of Japan's greatest artists. Painters and printmakers found in her form a symbol of modernity and desire, but also of discipline and harmony. In ukiyo-e woodblock prints, she appears beneath blooming cherry trees, her gaze distant, her presence serene. Artists like Kitagawa Utamaro and Suzuki Harunobu captured her as both human and ideal, a living embodiment of the floating world itself. Poets wrote of her subtlety, of the way her silence could speak louder than words. Kabuki actors studied her posture and grace, borrowing gestures and speech patterns to refine their own performances. In turn, geishas drew inspiration from kabuki, from its rhythm, timing, and theatrical symbolism. This exchange of influence created something remarkable, a shared language of art that connected theater, music, and life itself. It was a culture where beauty was not merely seen, but practiced, lived in every detail of existence. Inside the okaya, where geishas performed for guests. Art and etiquette blended seamlessly. A song might flow into a game, a joke into a verse into a moment of silence that said more than speech. It was not a show, but a shared experience, something ephemeral, created only for that night, for those people in that place. The guests who understood this world valued subtlety above all else. To appreciate a geisha's art was to learn to see beauty in small things, in the way her sleeve brushed against the floor, in the faint scent of incense as she passed. It was an education in awareness, a lesson in presence. The geisha's influence reached far beyond the walls of the tea house. Her manner of dress, her speech, and her gestures became ideals of sophistication for women across Japan. Writers described her as the pinnacle of refinement. Men admired her wit and emotional intelligence. Yet, her world remained closed, private, protected, hidden behind the screens of Hanamachi districts. To outsiders, she seemed like a figure from another age, a dream preserved in silk and song. But to those who lived in her presence, she represented the highest form of cultural achievement, a person who made art out of living. Even today, the arts she practiced, shamisen, nihonbyo, tea ceremony, flower arrangement, remain at the heart of Japanese aesthetics. They are taught, preserved, and performed in the same quiet, disciplined spirit. And though the number of true geishas has dwindled, their legacy continues wherever elegance is valued, wherever stillness holds meaning, and wherever beauty is found in restraint rather than display. Through centuries of change, the geisha has remained a living work of art, not because she performs, but because she reminds us that art exists in every moment, in every gesture, and in every fleeting breath of time. In Japan, time is not only measured by calendars or clocks, it is felt through the rhythm of the seasons, the slow turning of nature's wheel, the delicate shifts in light, scent, and sound. For the geisha, each season carries its own mood, its own palette, its own song. Her life and art move with the rhythm of the year, as naturally as the cherry blossoms bloom and fall. In spring, she wears colors of renewal, pale pinks, soft greens, touches of white, echoes of new leaves, and the first blossoms. The air is sweet with the scent of plum and cherry, and her dances reflect that sense of awakening. She performs at the Miyako Odori, the dances of the capital, where Kyoto celebrates both its past and the rebirth of the year. Her movements are light and playful, like petals drifting on the wind. Summer brings brightness and heat. The kimono grows lighter, the patterns more vivid water motifs, flowing fans, goldfish. In the warm nights, the sound of the shamisen carries through open windows, and lanterns sway in the evening breeze. Festivals fill the streets, Gion Matsuri, Obon, nights of fireworks and laughter. The geisha's performances become relaxed, fluid, mirroring the easy rhythm of long summer days. Autumn, in contrast, is a time of reflection. The air turns crisp, the leaves burn red and gold. Her kimono deepens in color, rust, amber, indigo, and her dances slow, filled with quiet emotion. She sings of falling leaves, of rivers turning cold, of beauty in decline. It is the season of gratitude, a gentle farewell to what has passed. Winter brings stillness. The world outside the tea house grows silent, and the geisha's art turns inward. Her kimono is layered and heavy, patterns of snowflakes, bamboo, and pine symbols of endurance. Inside, she performs under the soft glow of candlelight, her voice a thread of warmth in the cold night. The music of winter is sparse, but every note feels like a heartbeat in the silence. Through these cycles, the geisha becomes more than a performer. She becomes a living reflection of nature's rhythm, a mirror to time itself. Her art reminds those who watch that beauty is not constant, but renewed in every passing moment. To live by the seasons is to accept change without resistance. It is to find harmony in impermanence, to celebrate each beginning and to let each ending fade with grace. As the modern age approaches, this sense of rhythm, of living with nature, not against it, will become harder to hold. But in the quiet streets of Kyoto, in the measured steps of a geisha crossing a bridge at dusk, the old rhythm continues still. Each season ends and another begins, and through them all, she dances. When Japan entered the Meiji era in 1868, the country opened its doors to the world. For more than 2 centuries, the islands had lived in near isolation. Now, suddenly, steamships arrived in Yokohama, railways stretched across the land, and the influence of the West poured in like an unstoppable tide. Old ways gave way to new ideas. The samurai lost their swords, factories replaced workshops, and Western clothing began to fill the streets once lined with kimonos. For the geisha, this transformation brought both opportunity and uncertainty. She was a product of the old world, of lanterns, shamisen, and seasonal rituals, and yet she was also adaptable, intelligent, and deeply tied to the rhythms of society. As Japan redefined itself, so too did she. The Meiji Restoration was not just a political revolution, it was a cultural one. Western visitors arrived curious and fascinated. They wrote of Japan's mysterious women in white, of evenings in Kyoto, where laughter drifted from behind screens of paper and bamboo. The geisha became a symbol exotic, elegant, and distinctly Japanese. To diplomats and artists, she represented the nation's refinement, its artistry, and its grace. Foreigners, though, often misunderstood what they saw. Many confused the geisha with the courtesans of Yoshiwara, unable to see the boundaries carefully maintained within Japanese society. To them, the floating world seemed sensual and secret, and they mistook artistry for seduction. Within Japan, however, the geisha continued to evolve. The new era brought modern instruments, foreign melodies, and new fashions. In some districts, the shamisen was joined by the piano. In others, dances adopted hints of Western style. Yet at the same time, the core of the geisha's world, discipline, elegance, and cultural preservation remained untouched. For many Japanese, the geisha became a bridge between tradition and modernity. In an age when the past seemed to vanish overnight, she embodied continuity, a living reminder that beauty could endure. While factories smoked and telegraph lines hummed, her presence in a quiet tea house reminded people of stillness, of ceremony, of Japan's artistic heart. The Meiji government, eager to present Japan as a civilized, modern nation, also saw value in the geisha's image. At international exhibitions and diplomatic gatherings, she appeared as a cultural ambassador, a symbol of Japan's refinement and sophistication. Her art became a tool of soft power, introducing the world to a version of Japan that was polished, poetic, and peaceful. But the modernization of society also changed the world around her. The strict hierarchies of the Edo period began to dissolve. Merchants gained power, samurai lost status, and women slowly began to seek education and independence. In this shifting landscape, the geisha's role grew more complex. She was independent in ways few women could be. She earned her own living, managed finances, and made choices about her work. She was educated, worldly, and often better informed than the wives of her wealthy patrons. At the same time, she lived within rigid structures, bound to her okiya, her debts, and her community's expectations. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a period of duality. Steam engines and electric lamps entered the hanamachi, but the geisha still danced by candlelight. Newspapers published stories about modernization, while woodblock artists continued to carve her image as they always had. She belonged to both worlds, never entirely old, never entirely new. In cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto, her presence became more visible than ever. Geisha houses flourished, their clientele now including politicians, businessmen, and artists. The evenings they hosted were no longer reserved for pleasure alone. They became spaces where influence was exchanged, where art, politics, and commerce quietly intertwined. For many Western observers, the geisha became the face of Japanese femininity, poised, polite, and mysterious. This image would later shape literature and cinema around the world, though it often simplified the truth. The real geisha was not a symbol of submission, but of mastery, mastery of self, of art, and of time. During the Taisho era, in the early 1900s, Japan entered a period of cultural experimentation. Jazz music filled Tokyo's cafes, films from Hollywood played in Ginza theaters, and women began wearing Western dresses alongside traditional kimonos. Some geishas adapted performing to new music, hosting parties for foreigners and modern elites. Others withdrew, holding tightly to the traditions of Kyoto's Gion district, where the old forms of dance and ceremony were preserved like fragile treasures. This coexistence of old and new gave the geisha world a delicate balance. She was both timeless and contemporary, both guardian and innovator. Through her art, she reminded people that progress did not have to mean forgetting. By the early 20th century, the image of the geisha had become a cornerstone of Japan's identity, both at home and abroad. She appeared on postcards, in paintings, in early photographs. To the Japanese, she symbolized refinement and continuity. To the world, she was the essence of an enigmatic, beautiful nation. Yet, beneath the elegance, change was inevitable. The modern world was drawing closer, and soon, events far beyond Japan's borders would test the endurance of her delicate world. There are moments in history when even music must fall silent. As the 1,930 seconds unfolded, the hum of progress that once filled Japan's cities was replaced by the sound of marching boots, by the deep echo of drums that spoke not of festivals, but of war. In the Hanamachi, the flower towns that had long celebrated art and laughter, the silence came slowly, first as uncertainty, then as absence. The tea houses that once glowed with lantern light grew dim and quiet. The clinking of cups, the laughter of guests, the sound of the shamisen, all began to fade, replaced by whispers of rationing, loss, and waiting. For centuries, the geisha had lived outside of politics, her world shaped by music, not by power. But the war reached everywhere. Silk was rationed, kimono fabric was reused to make uniforms, candles and makeup became luxuries. Even the instruments, shamisen, drums, flutes, fell silent, their strings left untuned. The apprentices who once practiced every morning were sent to factories and hospitals. The masters who had taught them watched as their art dissolved into the noise of a nation preparing for battle. And yet, in some quiet corners, a few geishas continued. Behind closed doors, they danced for no audience but themselves, their steps slower, their movements gentler, not to entertain, but to remember. In those small, secret performances, art became an act of defiance. Each note played, each bow made, was a whisper against the forgetting. Outside, the world grew darker. Cities were bombed, families displaced, and Japan's identity fractured under the weight of loss. Inside the tea houses that remained, the silence deepened. It was not only the silence of fear, but the silence of mourning for a world that once celebrated grace and had now fallen into shadow. Yet even silence has its music. In the emptiness, the geisha's spirit endured, not as performance, but as memory. She existed now as an echo of what Japan had been, a reminder that beauty, once created, never disappears completely. When the war finally ended, that silence would not vanish all at once. It would linger like the last note of a song held in the air too long, fragile, trembling, but still alive. And from that silence, the first new melodies would one day begin again. As Japan entered the 1930 seconds, the world around the geisha began to darken. The calm rhythm of tea houses and dance schools was slowly drowned out by the sounds of marching boots, military songs, and factory sirens. The nation was preparing for war, and even in the lantern-lit streets of Kyoto and Tokyo, the changes were unmistakable. For generations, the Hanamachi, the geisha districts, had lived apart from the turmoil of politics. They were worlds of art, etiquette, and subtle joy, existing almost outside of time. But as Japan expanded its empire across Asia, no corner of the country could remain untouched. Materials became scarce. Silk, once abundant, was rationed for military use. Even the delicate fabrics of kimonos gave way to rougher cloth. Candles and makeup were hard to find, food even harder. The tea houses that once hosted laughter and music now stood silent. Many geishas closed their okiya, returning to their hometowns or taking other work to survive. Some were sent to entertain soldiers at military gatherings, a government effort to maintain morale. They performed songs and dances for officers, their art reduced to propaganda for a nation at war. The grace that once symbolized peace was now enlisted to serve an empire. Still, in places like Kyoto's Gion district, a few continued quietly, refusing to let the tradition vanish. Behind closed doors, in the soft glow of paper lamps, they practiced their music and dance in secret, a quiet act of resistance, an effort to keep the past alive in a time that seemed determined to erase it. When the war ended in 1945, Japan lay in ruins. Cities were flattened, families were broken, and the country's spirit, once defined by order and discipline, was adrift. Into this chaos came the American occupation, and with it, new misunderstandings. The sight of women in kimonos, waiting outside bars and clubs that served foreign soldiers, gave rise to confusion. The Americans called them geisha girls, not realizing that most were not geishas at all. These were women struggling to survive, working in the so-called pan-pan trade, a desperate answer to hunger and poverty. But to Western eyes, the distinction between them and the real geisha blurred. The word geisha became entangled with ideas of sexuality and submission, a distortion that still lingers in popular culture today. For the true geisha communities, this was a painful time. Their name, once synonymous with refinement, had been misused and misunderstood. Many tea houses never reopened. Others rebuilt slowly, determined to reclaim their dignity. In Kyoto, Kanazawa, and Tokyo, the okiya that survived began to revive the old traditions. The okasan trained new apprentices, while older geishas returned to performing, their art serving as a reminder that Japan's soul had not been destroyed. The post war years also brought a new kind of audience. Tourists and foreign journalists were fascinated by the geisha, by her appearance, her mystery, her perceived otherness. Writers and photographers captured her image again and again, often without understanding her true story. Yet their curiosity also helped preserve interest in the art itself. Books and films of the 1,950 seconds and 1,960 seconds turned the geisha into a global icon. Sometimes romanticized, sometimes misunderstood, she became a symbol of Japan's beauty and endurance. In Western imagination, she was a vision of elegance, frozen in time, a woman untouched by the modern world. But within Japan, the geisha's reality continued to evolve. Economic recovery brought new wealth, and the business world rediscovered the value of quiet, refined gatherings. Executives and politicians once again met in tea houses, where deals were discussed not in boardrooms, but over sake and music performed by geishas. Her world adapted, discreetly modernizing while maintaining the appearance of timelessness. In the 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds, as Tokyo became one of the world's busiest cities, the Hanamachi remained small islands of calm. Inside their narrow streets, the traditions of kimono, shamisen, and seasonal festivals survived, not as relics, but as living art. Every gesture still mattered, every bow, every smile, every note of music was a thread connecting modern Japan to its past. By then, the number of geishas had diminished greatly. From tens of thousands before the war, only a few thousand remained, but their role had shifted. They were no longer simply entertainers. They had become custodians of cultural memory. Their performances were attended not only by wealthy patrons, but by scholars, tourists, and artists who sought to understand what Japan had nearly lost. Through them, the aesthetic ideals of Iki, grace, and refinement lived on. The misunderstanding born during the occupation years never entirely disappeared. The myth of the geisha, mysterious, submissive, sensual, continued to appear in novels and films. But within Japan, those who knew the truth saw her differently, as a professional, a master of tradition, and a quiet symbol of resilience. She had survived isolation, war, and occupation, and through it all, she remained what she had always been, a woman devoted to her art, guarding the delicate balance between past and present. In the stillness of a Kyoto evening, when the lanterns flicker to life and the streets grow hushed, one can still hear the faint sound of the shamisen. It is the echo of survival, the voice of an art that refused to fade, even in the darkest of times. In the modern world, the image of the geisha endures, a figure at once ancient and ageless, her presence flickering like candlelight in the heart of modern Japan. Today, true geishas still exist, though their numbers are small, only a few hundred in Kyoto, and perhaps a few thousand across the entire country. They live and work in historic districts such as Gion, Pontocho, and Miyagawacho in Kyoto, Shinbashi and Asakusa in Tokyo, and Higashichaya in Kanazawa. In these quiet enclaves, tradition continues, surrounded by a world of neon lights, smartphones, and bullet trains. The Hanamachi, the flower towns, remain as they have for centuries, a maze of narrow streets, wooden houses, and soft lantern light. At night, The sound of wooden sandals echoes off the stone paths, and for a moment, it feels as if time has stopped. Inside the tea houses, the rituals of hospitality have changed little. Guests are still greeted with the same polite bows, the same rhythmic flow of music and conversation. A geisha's art remains what it has always been, a mastery of timing, grace, and emotion. Yet her world is smaller now, more fragile, and more precious than ever before. The number of okiya has declined. The cost of training, housing, and traditional garments is immense. Many young women no longer see the life of a geisha as desirable. Modern careers offer independence without the weight of obligation. Still, there are those who choose this path, drawn not by glamour, but by devotion. Their training remains as rigorous as it was centuries ago. Apprentices still rise early to clean, practice, and study. They still learn the dances, the songs, and the subtle arts of conversation. The difference is that now they also navigate a modern society where tradition must coexist with contemporary life. Some geishas now manage social media accounts, not for fame, but to preserve transparency and connection. They share glimpses of their craft with curious audiences around the world, reminding people that this art form still breathes. Others open cultural programs for visitors, offering demonstrations of dance, shamisen, and tea ceremony, hoping to spark appreciation rather than spectacle. In Kyoto, festivals such as the Miyako Odori, the dances of the capital, draw thousands of spectators every spring. It is a tradition more than a century old, where dozens of geishas and maiko perform synchronized dances to celebrate the coming of the cherry blossoms. The performance is not merely entertainment, it is an act of preservation, a living bridge between the past and the present. Today's geishas also face new challenges. Tourism brings visibility, but also intrusion. Visitors often chase them through the narrow streets of Gion, snapping photographs as if they were actors in costume. To protect their dignity, Kyoto has even enacted laws against photographing geishas without permission. Their world depends on privacy, on respect, on the understanding that art cannot survive when turned into spectacle. Despite these pressures, the true spirit of the geisha remains. In their quiet houses, lessons continue. New maiko still tie their hair in traditional styles, still bow before their onisen, still practice the same dances performed in the Edo period. The rhythm of the shamisen is unchanged, its three strings still singing the same ancient melodies. For many Japanese people, the geisha has become a symbol of heritage, a reminder that not all beauty must evolve, that some traditions have value simply because they endure. She is no longer central to Japan's social life, but she remains its living memory. The geisha of today moves between two worlds. She exists in the age of digital communication, yet her art belongs to an age when meaning was found in silence. She lives in a modern democracy, yet her daily life follows codes written centuries ago. This balance between change and preservation is what gives her continued strength. When one sees a maiko walking through Gion at dusk, her white face glowing softly beneath the red lanterns, there is something timeless in her image. She is both present and historical, a living thread connecting the Japan of the past to the Japan that continues to reinvent itself every day. The geisha's legacy now extends far beyond Japan. Artists, designers, and filmmakers across the world find inspiration in her elegance and discipline. Her symbolism has become global, sometimes romanticized, sometimes misread, but always powerful. And through exhibitions, cultural exchanges, and documentaries, the truth of her art is slowly reclaiming its rightful place, not as fantasy, but as a living, breathing expression of human grace. Even as the number of geishas declines, their influence deepens. Their way of life has become a mirror through which Japan reflects on what it wishes to preserve in an age of speed and change. They remind us that progress need not mean forgetting, and that in the quiet persistence of tradition, there is its own kind of revolution. And so, even in the 21st century, the world of the geisha endures, not as nostalgia, but as living proof that beauty and discipline can outlast any empire, any war, any era. In the soft evening air of Kyoto, when a lantern sways above a narrow street and the faint sound of music drifts through the night, it is still possible to hear her world breathing, a world of grace, of art, and of silence that speaks. Evening falls differently in Kyoto. The light fades not in a rush, but in slow layers, gold to amber, amber to blue, until the first lanterns begin to glow. The old streets of Gion seem to hold their breath at this hour. Tourists drift away, shopkeepers close their doors, and the sound of footsteps on stone grows sparse and soft. Somewhere nearby, a bell chimes from a distant temple, its echo hanging in the air like a sigh. Along Hanamikoji Street, the wooden latticework of tea houses glows faintly. Paper screens blur the silhouettes inside. A hand pouring tea, a figure adjusting her obi, the flicker of a fan in motion. For those who pause and look closely, the past and the present seem to overlap. A maiko appears at the corner, her white face luminous against the deepening dusk. Her hair ornaments catch the light, her steps careful but unhurried. The sound of her wooden sandals, okobo, echoes softly across the stones, a rhythm older than the city itself. She passes beneath the red lantern of a tea house and vanishes behind a sliding door. The world outside continues as before, cars passing, phones ringing, neon signs flickering. Yet for a moment, it feels as if time has folded back upon itself. Kyoto is a city of layers. Modern towers rise beside centuries-old temples. Cafes stand next to shrines. And through it all, the geisha still walks, a living thread that ties the city to its own memory. To watch her is to see history move through the present. She belongs to neither, yet gives meaning to both. For those who notice her, the travelers who stop for a moment, the locals who lower their voices as she passes, the sight is brief but unforgettable. In that fleeting moment, they glimpse something that words can't hold, a grace that has survived modern noise, a tradition that still breathes between the heartbeat of the city. As the night deepens, the lanterns burn brighter, and the sound of music drifts through the narrow alleys. The shamisen begins again, a soft, familiar melody carried on the evening air, and Kyoto, for a while, feels eternal. Behind every geisha's painted face is a real woman, a life lived within the quiet discipline of art, filled with challenges, triumphs, and sacrifice. The world may see the kimono, the fan, and the grace, but behind the image are stories of ambition, endurance, and devotion. Across centuries, some geishas became more than artists. They became legends, women whose lives shaped the history of their craft. One of the most famous among them is Mineko Iwasaki, a woman often described as the most celebrated geisha of the 20th century. Born in Kyoto in 1949, she entered the world of the okiya at a young age. Her training was relentless, hours of practice in dance, shamisen, and etiquette every day, with little room for rest or childhood. By her early 20s, Mineko was at the center of Kyoto's elite social life. She entertained prime ministers, princes, and foreign dignitaries. Her beauty and poise made her a living symbol of Gion's refinement. But beneath the surface, her life was not as glamorous as it appeared. She lived under constant pressure to maintain perfection. Every gesture, every word, every public appearance scrutinized. After more than 2 decades of dedication, Mineko chose to retire from the profession, seeking a life beyond the rigid traditions of her art. In her memoir, she revealed the reality of being a geisha, the discipline, the loneliness, and the quiet strength it required. Her story became known worldwide. After inspiring the character of Sayuri in Memoirs of a Geisha, though she later distanced herself from the novel's fictionalized portrayal, her own words stand as a testimony to the depth, dignity, and complexity of real geisha life. Long before Mineko, there was Kikuyo of Yoshiwara, a celebrated geisha of the late Edo period. She was renowned not only for her talent in dance, but for her wit and independence. Stories tell of how she declined the advances of powerful patrons with humor rather than defiance, a subtle act of intelligence that earned her respect. Her fame spread through woodblock prints and poems, making her a muse for artists and writers. Another name remembered in the old archives is Kiyoka of Kanazawa, a geisha who became known for her poetry and calligraphy. She wrote about the fleeting nature of her life, the transient beauty of a world that exists only in the moment. Her verses, preserved by scholars, reflect the same sensibility found in haiku: grace in impermanence, strength in silence. There are also stories that never reached fame, but speak of the quiet resilience of everyday geishas, women who trained for years, who performed each evening for guests whose names history forgot, and who carried forward the traditions of their craft with the same care as the great masters before them. Some faced hardship and loss. During the Second World War, many geishas were forced to leave their okiya and work in factories or hospitals. Yet when peace returned, they came back to the tea houses, dusting off the shamisen and reviving the songs they had nearly lost. Their return was not a gesture of nostalgia, but of renewal, a quiet insistence that beauty and culture must never vanish completely. In the modern era, new figures have emerged. Women like Tomitsuyu, Satomi, and Erika Eiraku, who continue the tradition in Kyoto and Tokyo. They appear in documentaries and cultural events, not as relics, but as living artists. They teach, mentor, and perform, their work reaching audiences far beyond Japan. Each of them carries the same legacy: the belief that true art demands humility, patience, and devotion. Some stories remain bittersweet. There are tales of maiko who trained for years only to leave before debuting, unable to bear the financial or emotional weight of the path. Others found in the geisha's world a rare form of freedom, a space where women could master skills, manage their income, and command respect in a society that otherwise limited them. In many ways, these women were pioneers. While much of Japan's history was written by men, the geisha wrote her legacy in gestures, in songs, in the quiet influence she held over those who came to her world. There are stories of ones and elder sisters who took apprentices under their wing, passing down wisdom not written in any book: how to listen without judgment, how to read the air in a room, how to remain calm when others faltered. It was an education of emotion and awareness, an art of human connection. And so, the lives of these women, famous or forgotten, form the hidden chapters of Japan's cultural story. Their names may fade, their faces may be remembered only in old photographs or paintings, but their influence remains. Through them, the art of the geisha continues to live, not in museums or textbooks, but in the living, breathing people who still walk the narrow streets of Gion and Kanazawa, who still bow before the evening guests, and who still believe that beauty is not a performance, but a way of life. Each story, each memory, is a thread in the long tapestry of tradition, a tapestry woven from music, grace, and quiet strength. And as long as those stories are remembered, the geisha will never truly disappear. Few figures in Japanese culture have been as misunderstood as the geisha. For centuries, she has been surrounded by mystery, admired, romanticized, and often misinterpreted. In the eyes of many foreigners, she became something she never was. Even today, people still ask, is a geisha a courtesan? Is she a remnant of Japan's feudal past, or a symbol of quiet empowerment? The answers lie not in rumor or fantasy, but in history and in the art itself. One of the most persistent myths is the confusion between geisha and oiran. Both were part of the pleasure districts of old Japan, and both appeared in art, wearing elaborate kimonos and hair ornaments. To the untrained eye, they looked similar, but their worlds could not have been more different. The oiran were courtesans, women of high social rank within the licensed red light districts. They were trained in the arts of charm, poetry, and conversation, but their profession centered on physical relationships with their patrons. Their beauty was bold and dazzling, their clothing extravagant, their presence theatrical and public. They walked through the streets of Yoshiwara in processions, their heavy kimonos sweeping the ground like moving paintings. The geisha, on the other hand, was a performer and artist in the truest sense. She was trained not to seduce, but to entertain. Her elegance came from restraint, her beauty from discipline. She did not parade through the streets. She moved quietly from one tea house to another, her steps measured, her appearance discreet. Where the oiran represented luxury and desire, the geisha represented refinement and art. Theirs was a beauty of control, a beauty that spoke softly, not loudly. Another common myth is that the geisha's profession was one of subservience. From the outside, her bows and politeness may appear submissive, but within her own world, she held remarkable independence. For centuries, geishas managed their own finances, chose their patrons, and often earned more than most men of their time. They were among the few women in pre-modern Japan who could live outside marriage and support themselves entirely through skill and artistry. They were also intellectuals in their own way, well-read, well-informed, fluent in the subtle language of social conduct. Their mastery of conversation required emotional intelligence and wit. To charm a samurai, a poet, or a politician demanded not obedience, but understanding. In modern times, the myth of the geisha as a symbol of exotic submission was strengthened by literature and film. Western observers, encountering the geisha world after the war, often saw what they expected rather than what was real. They described her through the lens of fantasy, a mysterious woman bound by beauty and silence. The truth, as always, is more human. The geisha's silence is not weakness, but control. Her modesty is not obedience, but mastery of presence. Her grace is the result of years of training, not the product of servitude. Another misconception is that all geishas lived glamorous lives. In reality, the path was hard and often lonely. Many entered the okiya as children, bearing debts they might spend years repaying. Their training demanded total dedication, days filled with repetition, nights spent performing for guests who would never know their real names. Few became famous. Most lived quiet, disciplined lives, their achievements measured in moments, not in fame. The romantic image of the geisha, the painted face beneath cherry blossoms, the delicate dance in candlelight, is not false, but incomplete. It is the surface of something far deeper, a life defined by choice, by resilience, and by artistry. Another myth concerns the geisha's relationship to men. In stories and films, she is often portrayed as an object of affection, a tragic lover, or a muse. But the true relationship between geisha and guest was one of performance and mutual respect. A successful evening was not about seduction, but about atmosphere, a shared moment of grace and escape from daily life. A guest might return for years, drawn not by desire, but by the comfort of her company, by the artistry of conversation, and the ritual of elegance. In this sense, the geisha's world offered something rare, human connection without possession. Finally, there is the myth of disappearance, the idea that the geisha is a relic of a bygone age. It is true that their numbers are smaller now, but they have not vanished. They continue to perform, to teach, and to adapt. They appear at festivals, on stages, and in documentaries. They welcome guests from around the world, sharing a culture that has survived centuries of change. The geisha endures because she represents something timeless, the pursuit of beauty through discipline, and the idea that elegance is not about perfection, but about balance and awareness. Her story reminds us that myths can be powerful, but truth is always richer. She is neither a servant nor a goddess, neither a fantasy nor a fossil. She is, and has always been, an artist, a woman who made life itself into a form of art. There is a moment, just after the music ends, when the last sound of the shamisen still trembles in the air. It is a sound too faint to name, part note, part silence, the breath between endings and beginnings. That lingering vibration is the essence of the geisha's world. Her art lives not only in what is performed, but in what remains after, the space left open for reflection, for memory, for stillness. The shamisen itself is a simple instrument, 3 strings stretched across a wooden body, played with a plectrum of ivory or tortoiseshell. But in the hands of a geisha, it becomes something deeper than music. It becomes a heartbeat, the pulse of a culture that measures time not in minutes, but in moments. Each note carries history. It echoes through centuries of practice, through the hands of teachers and apprentices, through the quiet rooms of Okiya and Ochaya. Every pluck of the string is a reminder that sound, like beauty, exists only for an instant. When the final chord fades, there is no applause, no loud conclusion, only silence. A silence that feels full rather than empty. It is the sound of the listener's breath slowing, the awareness that something delicate has just passed. In Japan, this moment has a name, ma. It means the space between things, the pause that gives shape to rhythm, the emptiness that allows form to exist. Without ma, music would be noise, and beauty would be chaos. The geisha understands this instinctively. She performs not to fill the silence, but to honor it. Her dance begins and ends in stillness. Her music is as much about what is not played as about what is. It is in that final echo, the one that drifts through the tea house before fading completely, that her art becomes timeless. Because even when the sound is gone, it lingers in memory, a vibration that continues in the listener's mind, in the air, in the heart. And so, as the last note disappears, the lesson remains: beauty does not end when it fades. It endures quietly, in silence, in memory, and in the spaces we leave for it to breathe. The story of the geisha is, in many ways, the story of Japan itself, a journey through centuries of transformation, discipline, and grace. From her beginnings in the pleasure quarters of Edo, to her rise as an artist of refinement and elegance, to her survival through war and modern change, the geisha has remained a reflection of what Japan values most: beauty, balance, and dedication to craft. She has endured because her art is not bound by time. It does not depend on technology or fashion. It exists in the movement of the hand, in the space between words, in the quiet rhythm of presence. In her, we see the essence of Iki, the understated sophistication that celebrates simplicity and control. She reminds us that beauty need not shout, it can whisper and still be heard across centuries. Her discipline is not a relic of the past, but a living philosophy. That mastery comes not from speed or ambition, but from patience and attention. Every dance, every song, every bow is an act of mindfulness, a moment where art and life become one. In an age that moves faster every day, the geisha's world feels like an echo of stillness. And yet, it endures precisely because of that. She offers what the modern world too often forgets: a space for silence, a reverence for ritual, a belief that meaning is found not in doing more, but in doing with intention. For those who walk the narrow streets of Gion or Kanazawa at night, the sight of a geisha, a figure in white and silk, gliding softly through the lantern light, feels like stepping into another time. But she is not a ghost. She is the living present of history, the embodiment of centuries, breathing quietly beneath the surface of modern life. Through her, Japan remembers itself, its art, its humility, its devotion to beauty. And through her, the world glimpses a truth that crosses cultures, that grace is not decoration, but a way of being. The geisha's legacy is not only in her performance, but in her endurance, in the fact that she still exists. In a time when so many traditions have vanished, she continues to teach what cannot be written in books: how to move through life with awareness, how to find art in the smallest act, how to transform even a simple moment into something eternal. Her world may be smaller now, but within its walls lies a universe of meaning. Every student who ties her first obi, every master who tunes a shamisen string, every lantern lit at dusk in a Kyoto alley adds another heartbeat to an unbroken chain. And so the story continues, quietly, gracefully, endlessly. The geisha does not belong to the past. She belongs to the flow of time itself, a reminder that art is not made only to be seen, but to be lived. When we listen to the soft notes of her music, when we imagine the rustle of silk or the warmth of candlelight, we are not hearing echoes from long ago. We are hearing life still unfolding in the present, still teaching us how to slow down, how to see, how to be. And perhaps that is her greatest gift, to remind us that beauty, when practiced with patience and sincerity, never truly fades. It endures, just as she does, in the quiet grace of every moment that passes, and every soul willing to notice it.